Welcome to SmallTalk by Svarim Chatter. I'm Nachi Weinstein. Hi everyone, welcome to another edition of the Svarim Chatter podcast. In this episode of the podcast, I'm going to be joined by Segal, who was an artist from Lakewood, who was recently involved and had a part, was behind the publication of the new book titled Living Jewish Art, the work of Itshak Holtz. And this was published by Abbeville Press. And there's a bio authored in here by Richard McBee. And David has a forward, a beginning note. So we'll talk about it. And this is an art book, so something a little different for Svarim Chatter. We're talking about a Jewish art. Itshak Holtz was, as we'll hear about, was a from artist. Maybe many listeners, I heard from some that were familiar with his art and are familiar with him. But we're going to be talking about art and the man behind this art. So thank you, David, for joining me. So let's start off. Tell listeners a little bit about yourself and your bio.
Thank you for having me, Nachi. A little bit about myself. I grew up in Brooklyn, in New York, and now I live in Lakewood. But my connection to art goes back as far as I can remember. Even as a child, I liked to draw, and I started with the basics, pretty typical of a youngster. Drawing, sketching people and places, learning the techniques of how to create depth through perspective, shadowing. And when you're younger, you focus on the things that are familiar to you. So you draw objects around the house, portraits of family members, portraits of Gedolim in my case, and over time I put together a typical portfolio of a 5-year-old. The kinds of subjects that you might expect from an aspiring young, from Jewish artist. But when I got a little older, after I got married, I took a deeper interest into art as a subject. I started studying the art history and theory. And by studying the works of other artists is when you learn the different styles, techniques, especially when you compare one work of art to another. You learn the qualities that resonate with you. And that's when I learned that art isn't only about realism, about making realistic looking pictures. It's more than that. It's more than just aesthetics. There's more to art than aesthetics. Art is a language. And from that language, you learn about the artists, their ideas and their perspectives on life, their culture and their times. And Jewish art is unique. It's a visual representation of Jewish themes and Jewish concepts and ideas. Interesting. One of my children came to the Shabbos table with a parasha sheet that had a picture of Egyptians and Jews on the same page. And what I pointed out was that the teacher drew the Egyptians in profile, while the Jews, on the other hand, were depicted in full, their portraits were in full front view. Mind you that this was a parasha sheet that I remember from when I was in elementary, and you could tell from its clarity that it had been photocopied maybe one too many times. But the reason the teacher chose to draw the Egyptians differently is because they were actually using the ancient Egyptian method of drawing. And if you look back to the drawings of Egyptians 3,000 years ago, drawings on the walls of pyramids, you'll find that they used exaggerated features and a linear approach in profile. They would depict their faces in profile. And they did it this way not because they lacked the skills or were primitive in any way. They understood the human form and they understood how to make realistic pictures, but they intentionally focused on the elements that were important to them. The same way you'd find by children. If a child would want to make a portrait of their father, for example, they'll start with a circle for the face. They'll make 2 dots for the eyes, and they may add a distinctive feature such as a beard or a pair of glasses, but the rest of the body, they don't pay much attention to. They may leave it as a stick figure. And the reason they do that is because they're focused on the elements that describe the father in their eyes. And when they're looking at their crayon drawing, they actually see an exact representation of what their father looks like. But in my later years, I also got to know contemporary artists and built relationships with them, such as Mr. Itshak Holtz, of whom this book is about, his life's work, and his dedication and devotion to the arts. That relationship had a big impact on me. He was not only an extraordinary artist, he was also a remarkable person, and that left an impression on me. But no book or teacher can teach the creative side of any discipline, and that has to come from within, from one's own sensibilities and creativity. And the way one approaches the ideas in art and the possibilities are just endless. And that's what makes the process both challenging and rewarding.
Yeah, and you have two books that you've, Haggadah and a book of art that you published. I know this is not, they weren't sold, so they're not public. Maybe we'll talk about at the end of the podcast, your own art, your own sketching, things you've done. So, but just some general questions about art, because this is something a little different. Svarim Chatter generally just does Svarim and Jewish history. Now, this is Jewish, and this is a book, a beautiful book that you published. But I do want to ask you a question about art, just in general, which is, we talk about Jewish art. I think you go into many people's houses today, what's popular, they have a picture of the Kaisel, they have a picture of Yerushalayim, things like that. And it could be funky or different or standard or whatever it is, whether it's an actual painting or they have the semi where it's like they painted on a printout of a painting, or it's just a print that was, a picture of a painting. But is that really art? When we're talking about art, of course it's a form of art, but I mean, when we're talking about art, what are we talking about here?
Good question, Nachi. What are we talking about here when we say art? But before we get into contemporary styles, let's maybe zoom out a bit. There's a rich history to Jewish art, and a lot of the forms aren't things that you might find hanging on your wall. It's found all around us. Kiddush cup, for example, architecture of a shul, stained glass windows, the crown of a Sefer Torah, the embroidery on the cover of a Sefer Torah. These have all been integral parts of Jewish culture, always found around us, woven into the fabric of Jewish life. And if you want to go back to the earliest source, you could look at the Mishkan, which was possibly the earliest form of Jewish art, and it was a masterpiece. From the materials that were used, the gold, silver, the dyes of the fabrics, the materials were chosen for their beauty, and the kalim with the incredible details of the menorah, the kaftairim and the frachim, they were designed not just for functionality, but also to inspire awe. And the big kahuna, where the pasuk says, "L'chavan l'sefares," it was an essential part of the avodah. But if we fast forward to today and defining what makes something Jewish art, I think that the subject matter is key. If you're going to paint a floral painting or a generic landscape, I wouldn't consider it Jewish art, even though Judaism includes nature and celebrates nature, but it has to be tied to a Jewish theme. So if somehow your landscape is telling the story of the Jewish journey, or the tree in your landscape is representing a family lineage or the Messiah, that would be something else. But it's all about the context and the connection to Jewish tradition.
Yeah. So now when we get to Jewish art, I think, we'll talk about Itshak Holtz and his art, really very nice, folksy, kind of European folksy art. You think of like Fiddler on the Roof style almost a little bit. And I think that's what people think of. When people think of Jewish art, or in general, when they think of Jewish life of yesteryear, they think of the shtetl, they think of that Fiddler on the Roof kind of vision. Maybe not, but I think that's generally the view when you think of something. Is that what we call Jewish art? Is that what one, and then we'll segue into Itshak Holtz and his style and his distinct style.
So Nachi, again, Jewish art is a lot more diverse than just the shtetl. There were many periods, like take medieval European art with their illuminated manuscripts, Eastern Europe, the 18th and 19th century. That's where you'll often see those nostalgic, quaint depictions of the shtetl. But Jewish art continues to evolve and thrive today, especially in Eretz Yisrael, where a lot of the art was inspired there in connection to the land. And you have contemporary works with even more complex themes than ever, themes on Jewish identity, and continues to grow at a very rapid pace. But Itshak Holtz, he didn't paint any nostalgic scenes either. He painted today's Jewish world, the lives of Jewish tailors in Brooklyn. And he may have used Hasidim for models, mostly because they have a certain authentic Jewish look in a way. But he focused on the present. It was a genre painting of everyday life, whether it was a tailor stitching away in a shop or bustling streets of Williamsburg. These aren't idealized visions of a past Jewish life. They're an honest take of the world that he lived in. But when you mention today's contemporary American market, much of it tends to focus on the decorative side. So you'll have a Kosel or a Kriyas Yamsuf that in some cases were designed with an eye for interior design to look good in someone's living room and to match the decor and the color schemes, and nothing wrong with it. It just seems more like a commodity and what's going to sell. But Holtz stands apart in that regard. And when he chose his colors, he never considered matching the client's couch cushions. His work was personal. It wasn't about filling up wall space. It was about capturing the spirit of Jewish life.
And I think when you look at real art, like Itshak Holtz's art, any color scheme can really work anywhere. You have a painting, right? You put the painting is something of itself. It just stays there. It speaks for itself. It doesn't go with the color scheme, whatever. Okay, so let's get into him, and we'll talk about more art throughout. So how did he become an artist? So like I said, the book, this Richard McBee, and we'll get more into the book specifically. Now we're really talking about him himself, Itshak Holtz as an artist, but the book does have a biography of him, and it talks about his background. So how did he become an artist?
Yeah, so he didn't just wake up one morning and start painting. Yeah, he actually studied at the Art Students League in New York, and that was a place where a lot of serious artists went to train. The interesting part is that during the period that he was studying there in the 1950s and 60s, New York was the place to be if you wanted to be an artist, but the art scene was dominated by abstract expressionism. So you had artists like Jackson Pollock and even famous Jewish artists like Franz Klein, Mark Rothko. They were pushing the new bold splashes of paint, the abstract shapes, intense colors. It was all about spontaneity and a certain freedom. And that was the trend in New York. But Itshak Holtz wasn't interested in that. That wasn't him. It didn't speak to him. He had an old school view of the world. That's what he wanted to paint, and that's what he painted, and he did it very well. In the early part of his career, he did do some commercial work to make ends meet, commissioned portraits. In fact, he even painted a portrait for the Johnson family from the Johnson & Johnson Company. Now, the Johnson family may have been collecting abstract expressionism, but when it came to their family portraiture, they called on Itshak Holtz. But by the time I came to know him, he had already built up a reputation. His work was very sought after by collectors who knew him, and his pieces stood on their own. They resonated with people who were looking to buy something that was real and authentic.
Yeah, and in the book, it's done by section. You have Jewish year, and you have landscapes. There's a beautiful picture of painting of Tzfast. You can kind of really see this, and you can almost see him working and how he envisioned Tzfast, looking at it with two almost Hasidim in the front, and a lot of pictures of Temani people, Hasidim, Rebbes, Yeshiva Bachrim. He would try to, and you really see him capturing again that like folksy style. Not sure if it was like a famous painting that people would know that kind of that style would be similar to. So you knew Mr. Holtz, and I have no idea. I was not familiar with him before I saw this book, but you really, I guess, you can see the kind of person by looking at the art. Like I said, you really can see the scenes that he was trying to depict, what he was seeing. You can see what type of person he was by looking at this artist.
Exactly. All art is really a reflection of who the artist is and their personality. It's a self-portrait in a way. You're looking through their lens and how they saw the world. There's a great quote from Mark Segal, a Jewish artist who grew up in Vitebsk, a small town in Russia, and he once said something to the effect that I am a Jew from Vitebsk, and everything I paint and everything that I am is a Jew from Vitebsk. Now, Holtz was a simple Yid, meticulous, and when it came to Yiddishkeit and when it came to art, he was very organized. Even his paints were neatly arranged in little squares on his palette, which was something unusual. And he had a very strong work ethic, impressive work ethic. I remember painting with him in Israel when he was in his 80s. And the weather there was also in the 80s, and he was standing outdoors painting for 2 hours straight. He didn't flinch at the heat. I mean, for myself, after a half hour, I was already looking for the ice cream stand. But he was so engrossed in his work that he didn't even notice. And people would stop by and watch, and you could tell that they were just amazed at how focused he was. Here was a man, elderly man in his 80s, but his energy was like a 30-year-old. Absolutely just lost in his painting. when you look at the subjects that he chose, it all makes sense too. He painted the people that were like him, dedicated, hardworking, focused on their own crafts. Those tailors, he painted them from the neighborhood, and you saw the connection to the quiet dedication to daily work. When he painted outdoors, even people in the neighborhood would come by, and how they reacted to the work. They would see him painting scenes of their own streets and their own neighborhoods, and it was like they saw it for the first time. They would tell him they hadn't realized that they lived in such a beautiful neighborhood. But that was the brilliance of Holtz. He was able to extract the beauty from the ordinary. He noticed how the sunlight hit the buildings, and how he arranged the figures in the scenes, the placement, the directions that they were going, all to come together in a stunning composition that captivates the viewer, and that was his gift.
Okay. So one thing I want to... first of all, I'll mention that I'll put a link to the book in the show's notes. It's available on Amazon. Again, it's $49.99. It's available in local stores, as you mentioned, if anyone interested. And, it makes a very good gift item also. If anyone looking for something want to buy a gift, someone buy something nice, something a little different, it's a really nice item. So I do want to mention, I mentioned before that you have your own art. I think here we should at least mention a few minutes, even though you didn't publish it, you published it. You didn't sell it. So you have your own art. If you want to talk about it, I know last year you published the Haggadah with some of your own, it's not oil paintings of him. It's really more charcoal drawings. And that's what about your own art, and what are the books that you published? Are you going to sell them to the public or no?
Yeah, so I put out a book. The first book was on the theme of the Beis HaMikdash era. It has about 18 etchings or so. Etching is an old method of printing, which has been used for hundreds of years, where the image is etched into a copper plate and then inked, and the inked plate, together with the paper, is passed through a press where the image is transferred to the paper in reverse. I have a small press at home, and I like the effect that it produces. So the images and the book is sort of a sequence following one's journey to the Beis HaMikdash. And I like the book form in a way over art that's meant to be hung on a wall, because with a book, you have more than one image, and you could work through a theme that you're able to flip through the pages, something that can't be done with a single painting that's on a wall. Here, you're holding it in your hand, and you have more contact with the art. Last year, I put out a Haggadah with a Hebrew and English text. It has 10 etchings in it. And one of the reasons why I chose the Haggadah, which of course has been illustrated so many times, is for its uniqueness as a book. It's hard to classify. It has tefillos on the one hand, and it's also an instructional manual for what you're going to be doing during the night. I found that a lot of Haggadahs illustrate the narrative, the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim, or the activities that you do, the Kaddish, Orchatz, etc. But the imagination is so integral to the Haggadah. We're actually participants in the night's activities. We eat the matzah and the maror, not just to remember what had happened, but we're eating the maror to feel the bitterness. And we dip twice through the night. We wear kittel, all to sense freedom. A big focus is on the imagination and visualizing oneself as actually leaving Mitzrayim. So it can take many forms, and the vision is a personal one. But my intention was for the images to be sort of a companion to the text, accompanying the reader through the themes of the night and enhancing their experience of the Haggadah.
And do you have plans on publishing anything else?
So yes, I am working on another book in conjunction with an author, a friend of mine, a Mechaber Sefer. He has written a few essays on the theme of Eretz Yisrael. I'm making the illustrations to pair with the essays, and hopefully we'll have more details on the publication in the coming months.
Stay tuned, basically. Stay tuned. And maybe it's something, another author who was a Sfarim Chatter guest. I'll leave it at that, and perhaps something will come of it. Maybe we'll do another podcast. We'll talk about that book when that comes out. So, okay. So like you said, if anyone's interested in your etchings, or, reach out to me and I can put them in touch with you. And again, for the book, for Itshak Holtz's art, you can check out the show's notes. And I hope listeners enjoyed this, something a little different, but it's art, Jewish art. You can check it out. And for anyone on the WhatsApp chat, I'll try to put up a picture or two of that. You can see kind of what we're talking about. But again, you check the show notes, you'll see the links you'll be able to check out, and you'll just Google Itshak Holtz and you'll see his art. So thank you, David, for joining me to discuss Itshak Holtz and his art and the book.
My pleasure, Nachi.